first witness is Dr. Claudine Gay, who is the president of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Our second witness is Ms. Liz Magill, who's the president of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Our next witness is Dr. Pamela Nadell, who is a professor of history and Jewish studies at American University in Washington, D.C. And our final witness is Dr. Sally Kornbluth, who's president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I now recognize Dr. Gay for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Claudine Gay, and I'm the president of Harvard University. It's an honor to be here today, representing a community of more than 25,000 undergraduate and graduate students, more than 19,000 faculty and staff, and more than 400,000 alumni, including multiple members of this committee. Thank you for calling this hearing on the critical topic of anti-Semitism. Our community still mourns those brutally murdered during the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel on October 7th. Words fail in the face of such depravity, the deadliest single day for the Jewish community since the horrors of the Holocaust. In the 2 months since the atrocities of October 7th and the subsequent armed conflict and humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we have seen a dramatic and deeply concerning rise in anti-Semitism around the world, in the United States, and on our campuses, including my own. I know many in our Harvard Jewish community are hurting and experiencing grief, fear, and trauma. I have heard from faculty, students, staff, and alumni of incidents of intimidation and harassment. I have seen reckless and thoughtless rhetoric shared in person and online, on campus and off. I have listened to leaders in our Jewish community who are scared and disillusioned. At the same time, I know members of Harvard's Muslim and Arab communities are also hurting. During these past months, the world, our nation, and our campuses have also seen a rise of incidents of Islamophobia. During these difficult days, I have felt the bonds of our community strain. In response, I have sought to confront hate while preserving free expression. This is difficult work, and I know that I have not always gotten it right. The free exchange of ideas is the foundation upon which Harvard is built, and safety and well-being are the prerequisites for engagement in our community. Without both of these things, our teaching and research mission founder. In the past 2 months, our bedrock commitments have guided our efforts. We have increased security measures, expanded reporting channels, and augmented counseling, mental health, and support services. We have reiterated that speech that incites violence, threatens safety, or violates Harvard's policies against bullying and harassment is unacceptable. We have made it clear that any behaviors that disrupt our teaching and research efforts will not be tolerated. And where these lines have been crossed, we have taken action. We have drawn on our academic expertise to create learning opportunities for our campus community. We have begun examinations of the ways in which anti-Semitism and other forms of hate manifest at Harvard and in American society. We have also repeatedly made clear that we at Harvard reject anti-Semitism and denounce any trace of it on our campus or within our community. Anti-Semitism is a symptom of ignorance, and the cure for ignorance is knowledge. Harvard must model what it means to preserve free expression while combating prejudice and preserving the security of our community. We are undertaking that hard, long-term work with the attention and intensity it requires. Once again, I thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss this important work. I have faith today that through thoughtful, focused, and determined effort, we will once again meet adversity and grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gay. Ms. Magill, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of this committee for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Elizabeth Magill, and I am the president of the University of Pennsylvania. Let me begin by saying that I and the University of Pennsylvania are horrified by and condemn Hamas's abhorrent and brutal terror attack on Israel on October 7th. There is no justification, none, for those heinous attacks. The loss of life and suffering that are occurring in Israel and Gaza during the ensuing war are heartbreaking. This pain, sorrow, and fear extends to our campus and to our city of Philadelphia. This hearing this morning takes place just 2 days after the Philadelphia community witnessed in horror the hateful words and actions of protesters who marched through the city and then near our campus. These protesters directly targeted a Center City business that is Jewish and Israeli-owned, a troubling and shameful act of anti-Semitism. Philadelphia police and Penn public safety were present, and thankfully no one was injured, but these events have understandably left many in our community upset and afraid. Anti-Semitism, an old, viral, and pernicious evil, has been steadily rising in our society, and these world events have dramatically accelerated that surge. Few places have proven immune, including Philadelphia and campuses like ours. This is unacceptable. We are combating this hate on our campus with both immediate and comprehensive action. I have condemned anti-Semitism publicly, regularly, and in the strongest possible terms. And today, let me reiterate my and Penn's unyielding commitment to combating it. We immediately investigate any hateful act, cooperating with both law enforcement and the FBI, where we have identified individuals who have committed these acts in violation of either policy or law. We initiate disciplinary proceedings and engage law enforcement. We have acted decisively to ensure safety throughout and near our campus, expanding the presence of public safety officers at our religious life centers and all across campus. On November 1st, just over a month ago, I announced Penn's action plan to combat anti-Semitism. This builds on our anti-hate efforts to date, and it is anchored firmly in the United States national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. The plan centers on 3 key areas and has many elements. Those areas are safety and security, engagement, and education. As part of this plan, I have convened and charged a task force to identify concrete, actionable recommendations, directing them to provide me with their recommendations both in real time and then a final report in a couple of months. To ensure that our Jewish students have a direct channel to share their experiences with me, I've created a student advisory group on the student experience. Today's hearing is focused on anti-Semitism and its direct impact on the Jewish community, but history teaches us that where anti-Semitism goes unchecked, other forms of hate spread and ultimately can threaten democracy. We are seeing a rise in our society in harassment, intimidation, and threats toward individuals based on their identity as Muslim, Palestinian, or Arab. At Penn, we are investigating all these allegations for members of our community and providing resources to support individuals experiencing threats, online harassment, and doxing. We will continue to deploy all the necessary resources to support any member of the community experiencing hate. As president, I am committed to a safe, secure, and supportive educational environment so that our academic mission can thrive. It is crucial that ideas are exchanged and diverse viewpoints are debated. As a student of constitutional democracy, I know that we need both safety and free expression for universities and ultimately democracy to thrive. In these times, these competing principles can be difficult to balance, but I am determined to get it right. And we must get this right. The stakes are too high. Penn would not be what it is without its strong Jewish community, past, present, and future. I am proud of this tradition and deeply troubled when members of our Jewish community share that their sense of belonging has been shaken. Under my leadership, we will never, ever shrink from our moral responsibility to combat anti-Semitism and educate all to recognize and reject hate. We will remain vigilant. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Magill. Dr. Nadell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Scott, for inviting me today. I'm Pamela Nadell. I'm a professor of Jewish history at American University, and I'm currently writing the book, Antisemitism, an American Tradition, supported by a National Endowment for the Humanities Public Scholar Award. And I'm delighted to be here today because this gives me an opportunity to thank Congress for sustaining through the NEH scholarship essential to understanding our nation's past. This is the third time I have testified about this topic before Congress. The first was in 2017, just 3 months after white supremacists chanting, "Jews will not replace us," paraded through the University of Virginia, brandishing torchlights, echoing Nazi stormtroopers strutting through Germany in the 1930s. I emphasize this because the anti-Semitism igniting on campuses today is not new. It is part of a long history of American anti-Semitism. While anti-Semitism is difficult to define, historical examples convey some of its contours. Anti-Semites believe that Jews have been corrupted by money since Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, and they've employed code names for avaricious Jews: Shylock, Rothschild, and in the 21st century, George Soros. Anti-Semites believe Jews conspire to destroy Christian Western civilization. These conspiracy theories gained currency in the 1920s when Henry Ford's newspaper ran the series, The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. Today, the charge that the Jews are internationalists has been replaced by the dog whistle globalist, implying that Jews are the puppet masters of the worldwide order. Across American history, people from all walks of life have conveyed anti-Semitic ideas since 1654, when New Amsterdam Governor Peter Stuyvesant tried to expel, and I quote, "this deceitful race, such hateful enemies and blasphemers of the name of Christ." Now, more than 350 years later, we have just marked the 5th anniversary of the murders at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. On city streets, abuse is hurled at Orthodox Jews, and swastikas are graffitied on dorm doors and also at the State Department. The long history of American anti-Semitism left its mark in higher education. Quotas on the admission of Jewish students began in the Ivy League in the 1920s and spread to more than 700 private colleges and universities. The campuses also wrestled with the challenge of anti-Semitic speech before this fall. In the early 1990s, Holocaust deniers took out full-page ads in college newspapers. Those ads launched furious debates about free speech on campus and also helped propel Holocaust courses into the university to respond to the disinformation. Anti-Israel invective has been flaring on campus well before this fall. I could look back more than 20 years. In October 2000, 200 students at the University of Michigan yelled, "Israel is a fascist state," and protested a Hillel teach-in. But the barbarity of the Hamas terror of October 7th adds a terrible new chapter to Jewish history. Anyone who claims to care about human rights should denounce these horrors. That so many on campus not only did not, but that they justified the savagery in name of opposition to Israel has caused Jews around the world deep anguish. While I deplore all hateful speech, anti-Semitic speech remains in America protected. Free speech stands at the core of the liberal arts education, an education which almost every member of Congress benefited from when they were students. But free speech does not permit harassment, discrimination, bias, threats, or violence in any form. And when they occur, our institutions, and not just the campus, but our nation, they have in place mechanisms to respond. The American Jewish community has long strategized about how to reduce anti-Semitism. Their efforts received a stunning confirmation when the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism was published. I believe this is the first time any nation has developed such a document. I urge Congress to do everything in its power to support the national strategy and also the forthcoming national strategy to counter Islamophobia. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kornbluth, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to describe how MIT is fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism. My name is Sally Kornbluth. I have been president of MIT since January of this year. As an American, as a Jew, and as a human being, I abhor anti-Semitism, and my administration is combating it actively. Since October 7th, my campus communications have been crystal clear about the dangers of anti-Semitism and about the atrocity of the Hamas terror attack. Let me repeat what I said in my very first message to campus. In that video, I said, quote, "The brutality perpetrated on innocent civilians in Israel by terrorists from Hamas is horrifying. In my opinion, such a deliberate attack on civilians can never be justified," unquote. I also made clear that students were feeling unsafe because of their Jewish faith or their ties to Israel, and said, quote, "That should trouble every one of us deeply," unquote. I have reinforced this message, including in a November 14th campus video. As I said then, quote, "Anti-Semitism is real, and it is rising in the world. We cannot let it poison our community," unquote. I have been direct and unequivocal, and such leadership statements are important, but they must be paired with action. And this is just what we are doing at MIT. Months before October 7th, MIT joined the International Hillel Campus Climate Initiative, which helps universities build awareness of and actions against anti-Semitism. We have launched an MIT-wide effort called Standing Together Against Hate. It will emphasize both education and community building, especially in our residence halls. In addition to fighting anti-Semitism, it will address Islamophobia, also on the rise and also underreported. MIT will take on both, not lumped together, but with equal energy and in parallel. Importantly, as is clearly visible on campus, we have increased the police presence. Safety has been our primary concern. Nonetheless, I know some Israeli and Jewish students feel unsafe on campus as they bear the horror of the Hamas attacks and the history of anti-Semitism. These students have been pained by chants in recent demonstrations. I strongly believe that there is a difference between what we can say to each other, that is what we have a right to say, and what we should say as members of one community. Yet as president of MIT, in addition to my duties to keep the campus safe and to maintain the functioning of this national asset, I must at the same time ensure that we protect speech and viewpoint diversity for everyone. This is in keeping with the Institute's principles on free expression. Meeting those three goals is challenging, and the results can be terribly uncomfortable, but it is essential to how we operate in the United States. Those who want us to shut down protest language are, in effect, arguing for a speech code. But in practice, speech codes do not work. Problematic speech needs to be countered with other speech and with education, and we are doing that. However, the right to free speech does not extend to harassment, discrimination, or incitement to violence in our community. MIT policies are clear on this. To keep the campus functioning, we also have policies to regulate the time, manner, and place of demonstrations. Reports of student conduct that may violate our policies are handled through our faculty-led Committee on Discipline. Our campus actions to date have protected student safety, minimized disruptions to campus activities, and protected the right to free expression. We are intensifying our central efforts to combat antisemitism, the vital subject of this hearing. I note that I am also deeply concerned about the rise in prejudice against Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians, nationally and in our community. And we are determined to combat that as well. We are also supporting faculty, staff, and student initiatives to counter hate. And thanks to an inspiring group of faculty members, we are seeing more discussion among students with conflicting views. We know there is further work to do, but we are seeing progress, and MIT's vital mission continues. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kornbluth. We've heard from many students that they do not feel safe. You've talked about that in your statements. But the anti-Semitism we've seen on your campuses didn't come out of nowhere. There are cultures at your institutions that foster it because you have faculty and students who hate Jews, hate Israel, and are comfortable apologizing for terror. How did your campuses get this way? What is it about the way that you hire faculty and approve curriculum that's allowing your campuses to be infected by this intellectual and moral rot? President Gay, I'm going to ask you to give me a brief answer. I also would invite you to follow up with more in writing, and we will follow up with you. So I will go down the line, President Gay, then President Magill, and President Kornbluth.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. Again, anti-Semitism has no place at Harvard. When we recruit faculty, we do so with the understanding that they are joining a community where we honor, celebrate, and nurture open discourse, both on the campus and in the classroom. And to be a successful teacher and educator at Harvard requires the ability to draw out all of the viewpoints and voices in your classroom, irrespective of one's political views. And we devote significant resources to training our faculty in that pedagogical skill and to prioritizing that in our recruiting and hiring.
Thank you. Ms. Magill.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the question. I'm troubled by what you're reporting about the culture of the institutions that we're leading. Very contrary to the values that I hold as a leader of University of Pennsylvania, as well as the institution, where any form of hate is very contrary to our values. I would venture and answer Chairwoman Fox that anti-Semitism has a role in the broader society, and that's what we're seeing happening in the society and on our campuses, and I'm committed to combating it in immediate term and the long term.
Thank you. Dr. Kornbluth.
Yes, so MIT is a majority STEM education and research institution, and we are devoted to solving the problems that face society. Our faculty are hired for their brilliance. Now, we allow them to say what they'd like in the classroom in the name of free expression, but we are committed to having them know that that our campus must be a welcoming and inclusive environment. And although they may say what they like in the classroom academically, targeting any individual student, harassing or discriminating is strictly forbidden in our classrooms and on campus.
Thank you. We will be following up with asking for specific plans for disciplining student and faculty who assault or harass students or prevent them from accessing undisrupted classes or campus spaces. We'll be asking for your plan for preventing this rot from perpetuating, how you're going to hire and assess instructors, how will you change how you govern students, and what are the practical steps you will plan to take. So I want to ask each one of you, President Gay, do you believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish nation?
I agree that the state of Israel has the right to exist.
Ms. Magill, same question.
I agree, Chairwoman Fox, the state of Israel has the right to exist.
Dr. Kornbluth.
Absolutely. Israel has the right to exist.
I want to thank our witnesses again for being here and to say we will follow up and to tell you that while we've talked about a larger culture out there, it's the universities who should be examples of what this nation is all about. I yield back.
Dr. Nadell, in your testimony on page 8, you talked about President Biden's U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, and in particular, you talked about the use of Title VI of the U.S. Civil Rights Act in terms of being an effective tool on campuses to combat anti-Semitism. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
So Title VI allows for responding to some of the issues that the presidents of these universities, but also, frankly, of most universities around the nation, it seems at the moment, have been dealing with in terms of when anti-Semitism moves beyond free speech, beyond rhetoric, and it involves harassment or intimidation. The issue is that the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education needs to be fully funded in order to implement the U.S. strategy to counter anti-Semitism. And I just want to comment about this strategy because it is an extraordinary document. It has actions for the White House to carry out, or that division, but it has issues for Congress to carry out, which I have a sense Congress has not been carrying out, and it also has major charges to whole of society to respond to anti-Semitism, some of which we are hearing is already happening on the campuses. The problem is they don't make headlines because they're not a bunch of protesters.
Thank you. And again, it's important to note that document was released back in May of 2023, certainly before this committee and the outrageous events of October 7th. And the ranking member mentioned in his opening remarks that, at the same time we're holding this hearing, we're also now still trying to get a budget passed for fiscal year 2024. The majority in the House reported out their budget, which, as he mentioned, carried a cut for the Office of Civil Rights. To be more specific, it's a 25% cut, $35 million out of their rather small budget, $72 million lower than what the president had asked for. We had a witness here again 2 weeks ago from the 8 who worked for almost 20 plus years at ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. They've been around for 110 years fighting anti-Semitism in this country. And again, she talked about the fact that, that type of cut is just going to cripple the ability of the anti-Semitism police, if you want to sort of look at it that way, in terms of trying to stop this type of activity on campuses. And again, I was just wondering if you had sort of what your view is of a cut in terms of the impact of the Office of Civil Rights to do its job.
I think the cut is absolutely devastating. And what I would also remind everyone is that the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education does not only focus on anti-Semitism, it focuses on all forms of hate. And I would guess, I actually tried to find this information but was unable to do so, but I would guess that the majority of complaints are not coming from Jewish students, although maybe now, given what happened since October 7th, I would guess the majority of the complaints are actually coming from people of color and from others who have faced terrible bias. So it is unthinkable, unconscionable to make that cut.
And talk is cheap. I've been around here a while. Budgets are what really, I think, show the true willingness to act in situations like this. And I'd just like to close by mentioning that in Connecticut, a young transfer student, international student from the West Bank, Tahsin Ali Hamad, a sophomore at Trinity College, who's a math major who was up visiting friends in Burlington, Vermont. They were walking from going bowling, and this coward came out of his house with a firearm and at point-blank range shot all 3 students who were they were going to a relative's house at the time. And it shows, again, that the civil rights effort of the Department of Justice, which also is being subjected to a potential cut, needs to get full funding in the Office of Civil Rights. And with that, I would yield back.
Ms. Wilson from Florida.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Fox and Ranking Member Scott, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimonies today. As the witnesses have shared, anti-Semitism anywhere is abhorrent and unacceptable and must be condemned. I'm privileged to represent a strong, united Jewish community in South Florida. My next-door neighbor is a rabbi. My Jewish constituents have experienced everything from bomb threats on Jewish centers, schools, to harassment of Jewish community members. I stand with them. We talk often, we commiserate, and we pray. We must take a stand against all forms of hate, whether that be anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, and terrorism. This must stop. In Congress for 7 years, I led the fight against Boko Haram, a terrorist group that kidnapped over 300 schoolgirls in Nigeria, gang rapes, beheadings, killing whole families. So I am particularly sensitive to this issue of terrorists and what they do. But disagreements about the conflict in the Middle East should never escalate to threats of violence against any community. We are a civilized society. We must draw a line and condemn hate. Please know that in May, the Biden-Harris administration introduced the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism, a comprehensive approach addressing anti-Semitism in diverse environments, including college campuses. With that, I have a few questions. Ms. Nadell, based on your knowledge from 2016 to 2020, what has been the United States response to anti-Semitic events? I'm specifically thinking about Charlottesville, Unite the Right, and what the Trump-Pence administration did compared to this administration. Ms. Nadell.
The Unite the Right rally at the University of Virginia and in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017 was, for me, and I believe actually for the majority of American Jews, a major turning point. It signaled that the long history of anti-Semitism in the United States, that it was about to burst out again. And for the first time ever that I know of, Jews who were worshiping in their synagogues, in a synagogue on Saturday morning, and they watched some of those Unite the Right ralliers parade past the synagogue armed, and they had to sneak out of the back of the synagogue because they were afraid that violence would break out. So what we are seeing in terms of anti-Semitism in this moment in time is that it's been rising and rising since 2016. And although President Trump called the people who were the protesters and counter-protesters, said there were very good people on both sides, I disagree. I do not think there were very good people on both sides in Charlottesville in August 2017.
Okay, as I reflected, Professor Nadell, on the horrific events in the Middle East and the subsequent fallout on college campuses, I have been in contact with my friend and former congressional colleague, Ted Deutsch, who now heads the American Jewish Committee. The committee is the author of the AJC Action Plan, a toolkit for university administrators. One of the recommendations is that the university administrators recenter the conversation about the Middle East back to a place of fact-based exchange. Could you comment on why this suggestion is important? And I'd like to, Madam Chair, enter this report into the record.
Without objection.
This action is important because the campuses where faculty who come from Middle East studies and faculty who come from Jewish studies have long been in conversation, not just since October 7th, those are the places where what we do in the university has been manifested in the best way. So I'm thinking, for example, of Dartmouth University, where they held a forum, and they had, in their second forum, 300 people in the room, and they had 5,000 people online. Our universities not only educate our students today, but we can educate the wider public. And so I very much agree. I admire Ted Deutsch, and I admire the American Jewish Committee for what they are trying to do, but this is not a magic bullet. It's not going to be fixed overnight, but we are in the process of working on it and hopefully tamping down anti-Semitism in America once again.
Your time is
Thank you, and
expired.
I yield back.
Mr. Thompson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for calling this important hearing. Thank part of that, and I'm a strong supporter of the right to free speech, including on college campuses. Does University of Pennsylvania have any policies or procedures in place to ensure that BDS supporters cannot implement their boycott positions in their official capacities, or not given such individuals administrative powers to begin with?
Well, it's the position of the institution that we do not engage in boycotting, sanctioning, or divesting, and I would think that would follow for any member of the organization who is acting in their official capacity. But if you have specifics that I could follow up on after this hearing, I would very much like to hear them.
We'll do that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate the full committee's focus on this issue. I want to reiterate, as I did in the other hearing we had recently, that anti-Semitism, as well as Islamophobia and other forms of bigotry based on race, ethnicity, national origin, or religion are abhorrent and must not be tolerated. I'm deeply troubled by recent anti-Semitic incidents at colleges and universities across the country, including those whose presidents are here today. And I stand with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in calling for proactive steps from all of these institutions of higher education to root out discrimination, hatred, and bigotry in all of its forms. I also want to note that the main point of this hearing should be to identify bipartisan solutions to combat anti-Semitism, not an excuse to attack higher education, liberal arts education, or important diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's happening at colleges and universities across the country. There are legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism on college campuses, and that's what we should focus on today. Not doing so is a disservice to the students across the country who are looking to Congress for support for and the public for the institutions. So during the previous hearing, I highlighted my support for additional funding for the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and I want to join Representative Courtney in repeating that request today. OCR will be better able to enforce Title VI violations and protect students' civil rights with adequate staff and investigatory capacity. So I want to make that clear. We must do that. Dr. Nadell, thank you for being here and for your work over the years. Public colleges and universities, as we know, must uphold constitutional free speech rights. And many private institutions also recognize the value of free speech and robust debate. I think all of our presidents recognize that today, but also with the understanding that schools cannot allow their campuses to become places where anti-Semitic speech makes students unsafe or feel unsafe. I think that's recognized. So, Dr. Nadell, what are some of the best ways that colleges and universities can work to make their campuses welcome, safe, and inclusive spaces for all students in light of incidences of hate speech and discrimination, while also adhering to First Amendment principles?
So thank you for the question. I think there are different forms and different venues for expanding this discussion of the very difficult issue that has sparked and ignited the anti-Semitism or the outbursts on college campuses that we've been seeing since October 7th. So one form, obviously, is the classroom, although I would remind the members of the committee that the reality is that most students during their college career, they take a handful of courses. Many of them are studying STEM, and most of them are actually never in classrooms where they're hearing a discussion of issues like anti-Semitism or the conflict in Israel and Palestine. So that's the first thing that I would point out. So we academics can continue to foster those conversations, and we need to take them outside of the classroom. I think the other place where there can really be a lot of work done that would be very successful is on the side of student life on campus. And so student organizations are, they range broadly and widely on the campus, everything from a gardening club to obviously some of the student organizations that have been involved in the protests against Israel. So
Thank
these
you.
are
And
other
Dr.
places.
Nadell, I don't want to cut you off, but
Yeah.
I have to get another question
Oh,
in.
yeah,
I'm running
sure.
out of time, but thank you
Okay.
for your work. And I also want to recognize as well the AJC Action Plan for Confronting Campus Anti-Semitism. President Gay, I understand that there's an ongoing investigation. Question,
Oh,
and
yeah,
I'm running
sure.
out of time, but thank you
Okay.
for your work. And I also want to recognize as well the AJC Action Plan for Confronting Campus Anti-Semitism. President Gay, I understand that there's an ongoing investigation of your institution by OCR because of anti-Semitic incidents that occurred on campus. And I know we'll be closely monitoring the outcome, but in the interim and over the long term, what can Congress do to support your institution and other colleges in preventing discrimination? And also, if you could also respond in the brief time, you mentioned that Harvard will not permit speech that incites violence or threatens safety. And I'd like you also to address who decides that and how and in what time frame.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your questions. You're correct that there is an ongoing investigation, and obviously I can't comment on an active investigation other than to say we will work with the office to answer all of their questions. And I will say the work of the office is vitally important for ensuring students have access to educational opportunities. So I fully support the work that they do and hope that the office gets the resources that it needs to be effective. With respect to I believe the question was about student conduct. So again, we are deeply committed to free expression, but when speech crosses over into conduct that violates our policies, policies against bullying, harassment, intimidation, we do take action. And we do have faculty-led student disciplinary processes that are quite robust. And even over the last couple of months, as there have been incidents, we've been leaning into those processes, and we do have disciplinary actions underway.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Anti-Defamation League found that reports of anti-Semitism have nearly quadrupled since this point last year, and we're seeing that reflected on college campuses, with Jewish students reporting that they feel unsafe. No student should feel unsafe. I think we all agree. Anti-Semitism, and indeed all forms of hate, have to be rejected everywhere. And while all of you as college administrators have a responsibility to condemn hate and acts of hate in all its forms, including anti-Semitism, I know that you also face the challenge of and the responsibility of ensuring that people can engage in healthy debates of ideas in a way that fosters safety and inclusion for everyone. So I want to thank you for your commitments to work to ensure a continued diversity of perspectives on your campuses, a diversity of faculty with varied lived experiences. I know that my Republican colleagues have been trying to attack DEI initiatives, including the funding for those initiatives, for some time, and I hope that that is clear in terms of some of the comments that have been made. I want to just give Dr. Gay 30 seconds to respond to anything, given the line of questioning that you had right before, in case you wanted to say anything before I go to my lines of question.
Thank you for the opportunity, but I'm satisfied that I've conveyed our deep commitment to free expression, recognizing that it's uncomfortable.
Thank you, Dr. Gay. Dr. Kornbluth, your institution is one of many that has responded to incidents between pro-Israel and pro-Palestine groups. Many college campuses have been grappling with their responses to prevent anti-Semitism, to prevent Islamophobia and other forms of hate, while also making sure that every student feels safe to express their thoughts in accordance with the principles of free speech and to engage in the idea of critical thought on college campuses, which I think is what many of us appreciated about our college experiences. Can you speak to the challenges that you've faced in condemning hate and acts of hate while making sure that students were heard? And also just want to appreciate the distinction that you made in one of your comments between what we can say and what we should say, and just say that, frankly, I think there's been an explosion, thanks to the previous president in part, that has shattered the norms of what is acceptable to say, and we're dealing with some of the effects of that. But what challenges have you faced in condemning hate and acts of hate while making sure students were heard?
Thank you so much. And I have to
And
say...
if you can just pull that microphone
I'm
right up to
sorry.
you, that would be great.
I'm sorry, thank you. I have to say my absolute goal is to ensure the safety of students and the continuity of our research and educational missions. And these recent events have troubled me deeply, and we have mobilized as a campus. I think the most important thing is first knowledge, to understand that, as I mentioned in a previous answer, that our leadership, our students, and our faculty have to have knowledge. But way more importantly right now is these students are thrown together in classrooms, in laboratories, in dormitories every day. This is where the dialogue is taking place. And we have to ensure that they have the tools for constructive communication across differences. We are bringing these discussions to the dormitories. We have a Center for Constructive Engagement where the students are going to be able to have small roundtable discussions with each other. We have funded and mobilized, and I cannot tell you how wonderful our faculty have been. They've just issued a statement from 300 faculty about unity and working together with the students. And so there have been lunches, there have been meetings for our Israeli and Jewish students with Jewish faculty, for our Arab and Muslim students with Arab and Muslim faculty, but now they're working to figure out how to bring them together. If we're all gonna live and work together productively, we have to move beyond, formal training, which we are committed to, but to actual real dialogue and to actually model constructive and civil dialogue for our students. That's what being in university is all about.
Very powerful. Professor Nadell, these challenges of protecting free speech while denouncing anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all forms of hate, that's not unique to MIT or to the institutions that are here. Can you speak to the same question of the most effective ways to facilitate education and dialogue to ease tensions at other colleges and in general?
The most effective ways, and obviously I very much appreciate your question because this is happening across the United States on colleges and campuses, small and large. And the most effective ways are to recognize the many different levels and mechanisms for facilitating these dialogues at the student level, at the faculty level, at the administrative level, and bringing how to unite the campus, bringing the campus together. That's what we're all trying to do, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Thank you all so much for your work. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr. Comer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many of our country's top universities and colleges are for sale. That's a fact. And our biggest foreign adversaries know it. Take, for instance, China and the Chinese Communist Party. They have used so-called Confucius Institutes on college campuses to spread CCP propaganda. Now we're learning about billions of dollars flooding into our universities and colleges from countries supporting terrorists that hate what our country stands for. For example, the U.S. Department of Education data shows that Qatar, a key backer and ally of Hamas, is one of the largest investors in U.S. universities. It has given more than $5 billion to U.S. institutions of higher education since 2001. Ms. Magill, data from the Department of Education shows UPenn has received more than $1.5 billion from foreign sources. Earlier, you shared with Representative Steele that Penn does not accept gifts from the government of Qatar, but has received gifts from alumni who reside in Qatar. Do you know the total amount of those gifts from alumni in Qatar?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Comer. We, of course, follow all of the laws, and we accept no gifts that are inconsistent with our academic mission that would create any interference with doing what we do at Penn. What I know about Qatar is what I mentioned earlier, is that I'm not aware of any government gifts, and we have a few alumni in Qatar. The number I have in front of me is about $2,000 a year from the donors that we have, the private individuals in Qatar.
Does Penn have a policy to not accept donations or gifts from countries that harbor or support terrorists?
Congressman Comer, we are guided by the federal government on this matter, and we follow all of the rules.
Dr. Kornbluth, this report from the National Contagion Research Institute and the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy shows MIT received a total of $859 million from foreign sources between 2014 and 2019. Has MIT accepted money from Qatar?
So all of our, as I said previously, all of our funds are for open publishable research. We maintain full control over the research being conducted. I would have to get you the specific funding on Qatar via the staff after this session. It's publicly available information in the public record.
Well, does MIT have a policy of not accepting money from countries that harbor or support terrorists?
So our review of all foreign money is seen through the lens of national security, economic security, and human rights.
So I say no, then. Do you, your university, think it's a good policy to accept donations from countries that support and/or harbor terrorists?
I've told you what our policy is. Thank you.
I ask unanimous consent to submit this report, Madam Chair, titled "The Corruption of the American Mind," into the record.
Without objection.
Dr. Gay, how much money does Harvard receive from foreign sources that support Hamas or have links to terrorist organizations like Qatar, Lebanon, and the Palestinian Authority?
Excuse me, sorry, Congressman. Harvard has policies that govern the acceptance of gifts and contracts, beginning with respecting federal law, which means that we don't accept gifts or contracts from entities that are on restricted lists. But then we go further and only accept gifts that align with our mission and that provide autonomy for our research and our faculty. We have alumni all over the world, and their philanthropy supports student aid and scholarships and cutting-edge research.
Okay, well, does the Department of Education reports that Harvard has received more than $19 million from Qatar, $2.5 million from Lebanon, and more than $1.5 million from the Palestinian Authority as of October 2023. As university president, do you think Harvard should be accepting money from countries that support terrorists?
Again, we have strict policies that govern the gifts and contracts that we accept.
But do you have a
comply
personal
fully
opinion?
with federal law, and we will not accept gifts that do not align with our mission and retain
So
autonomy.
will you make a commitment to not accept money from countries that we know support terrorists?
We follow federal law.
The anti-Semitism on college campuses across the country, including your campus, has been shocking to witness, and that goes to all the witnesses I've asked questions to. We've seen the celebration of terrorism on all of your campuses, including from faculty. But when we see how much foreign money, including from our most dangerous adversaries, is going into our colleges and universities, maybe we shouldn't be that surprised. So you need to immediately reevaluate the sources of foreign donations and recognize the poisonous effect that this is happening on your campuses. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. Mr. Burleson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses that are here today. In response to the ongoing harassment of Jewish students, including supporting a, quote, National Day of Resistance, the Anti-Defamation League sent a letter to colleges and universities around the country urging them to investigate the activities of their local campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. Several universities followed through with that, and as a result, some universities kicked those chapters off their campuses. In some instances, Columbia University suspended the SJP and the Jewish Voice for Peace. What steps have your universities taken to address the Students for Justice in Palestine? Dr. Gay.
Thank you for the question. So, as I indicated earlier, I reject so much of the hateful and reckless speech.
I don't want to
But we
long
don't-
answer. I just want to know, have you taken any steps, have you followed suit with these other universities to remove this hateful organization from your campus?
We do not punish students for their views, but we hold them accountable for their conduct and behavior. And any conduct that violates our rules against bullying, harassment, or intimidation, we take action.
So your answer is no. Doesn't it concern you that your policies say that intimidation is a factor for removal, and yet This group, clearly, their very presence is an intimidating factor to Israeli students. Do you have any concerns?
I'm concerned about students who don't feel safe and welcome on our campus and wanting to make sure, and I want to make sure that they receive all the support that they need. And when other students transgress and violate our policies, they will be held accountable.
Thank you. Ms. Magill, can you tell me, at your university, have you taken actions to remove the Students for Justice in Palestine?
Thanks for the question, Representative Burleson. We have similar policies, which is that any organized student group must comply with the rules of the university, and if they have violated those rules, they can be non-recognized.
Okay. And then Mrs. Kornbluth, same question.
So as far as I know, we do not have an SJP chapter. We do have students who are allied with, are interested in advocating for the Palestinian cause, but we are not aware of any national links of that group.
The next line of inquiry has to do with the lack of reporting standards when it comes to these foreign contributions, as was mentioned by my colleague. I understand that Harvard and MIT are under Section 117 investigations. A New York Post article just recently revealed that MIT received over $859 million in foreign funding. I think Harvard received similar numbers, nearly $900 million. And as was stated, some of this money is coming from countries in the Middle East that have a history of large contributions to fund these academic centers called the Middle East Studies Centers. Has Harvard taken any money to fund the Middle East Study Centers?
We receive support from a variety of sources, and our alumni are all over the world, including in the Middle East, who support our activities on campus.
Well, an analysis has indicated that there is a direct correlation between the universities that have received money for these Middle East study centers and the activity of the SJP. So I would highly encourage you to examine, and I'll just ask it directly. Is it because of the money that you're receiving from these foreign countries that you're not kicking these hate groups off campus?
Our donors do not influence how we run the university, how we enforce our policies, or how we keep our students safe.
I yield the rest of my time to my colleague from New York.
Dr. Gay, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules on bullying and harassment?
The rules around bullying and harassment are quite specific, and if the context in which that language is used amounts to bullying and harassment, then we take action against it.
Mr. Williams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have the unfortunate distinction of being a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania as well as a visiting student at Harvard University for a year. The purpose of this hearing is to assess the health of our most elite and until recently esteemed educational institutions in this country. We raised the question whether your institutions and others like them deserve to enjoy the benefits of partnerships with our government. Research investment, student loan guarantees, tax-free status for your endowments, funding for veterans to receive educations tied to their prior service, like myself, or their ongoing service. It's been stated several times that this runs in the tens of billions of dollars across higher education, perhaps even into $100 billion. Dr. Gay, you've repeatedly in your testimony today have claimed that you believe in accountability, that acts of hate are personally abhorrent to you, that you follow federal law, that you believe all parts of your community must feel safe and secure, and that education is the solution for anti-Semitism. Does this accurately reflect your views?
I've expressed those views, yes.
And those are your testimony today. How long have you been president of Harvard?
5 months.
Sorry?
5 months.
Mm-hmm. What is your annual budget?
For the entire university?
Yes.
About 6 billion, pretty close to that.
6 billion. How many employees?
We have 19,000 faculty and staff.
And how large is the university endowment?
It is just over $50 billion.
And how long has Harvard been in existence?
387 years.
337 years.
87.
87, sorry, I cut you by 50 there. You've said that education is the solution. All of you agreed, actually, that education is the solution for anti-Semitism, yet your educational institution, under your leadership and previous leaders, is seething with hateful and threatening anti-Semitic demonstrations. But these are only, as I mentioned, these are only against the Jewish students, no one else, just Jews at your school. Yet, you say you believe in accountability. Should the federal government keep shoveling money and privilege to institutions like yours that fail so profoundly in their mission? Your mission's to educate. Education's the solution. You have 387 years, and you've arrived at this place of virulent anti-Semitism and hate. Why should the federal government continue to partner with you in such a failed accomplishment or lack of accomplishment?
The federal university partnership is not only a critical source of the success of all American higher education.
Well,
it
maybe we should
also
redirect it
is-
to the ones that are, because there are other universities that are succeeding. I'm trying to get at the heart of if education is the solution. You don't seem to be accomplishing that solution, even though you've had a 387-year run-up to stamp out anti-Semitism. What happened? Is it leadership?
We have work to do to build the community that our students and our faculty deserve.
I'm looking backwards. I'm saying, how did you arrive here if education is your mission and anti-Semitism is your result? How did you arrive here? Let me help. 100 years ago, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, other Ivy League schools actually publicly and actively began restricting Jewish enrollment. But now, I'm proud to say that Syracuse University in my district resisted this trend and did not implement those kinds of policies. But today we actually see the fruit of those decisions. And it seems to me that the leadership that we needs moral clarity to understand the moment that we're in. And I'm not really hearing that, frankly, from anyone. Ms. Magill, how long have you been the president of University of Pennsylvania?
Just under a year and a half, Congressman.
And the budget and employees there?
About 12 billion, because we have a very large health system. We have about 45,000 employees.
The endowment, please.
About 20 billion.
Do you not have enough resources to complete your mission, your stated goal of education?
We have many resources that we invest in the education of our 30,000 students.
So if education's the mission and education's the solution, how did you, Penn, arrive at this horrible place that actually I'm ashamed to be an alumni of your university?
I'm very sorry to hear that, Congressman.
I'm not alone.
We have work to do. I agree.
Well, I keep hearing that. I think you have a need for leadership or a need of federal intervention to cut off the resources that allow this this mission that's failed to continue. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Houchin. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for testifying today. I want to just say how frustrated I am that this hearing is even necessary. I would be naive to not to recognize, though, anti-Semitism on our university campuses, including my home state. As you may know, this fall, 2 members of the Indiana University student government published a resignation letter due to the blatant anti-Semitism of the student body president. According to their firsthand testimony, this student body president was intentionally neglecting the experience of Jewish students on campus by not only refusing to meet or work with Jewish students, but by actively ignoring the voices of those who tried to bring attention to their issues and the concerns for the well-being of their Jewish students. It's especially appalling when we recognize that 10% of Indiana University's student body is Jewish. Campus life in the United States has become a daily trial of intimidation and insult for our Jewish students A hostile environment that began with statements from pro-Palestinian student organizations justifying terrorism has now rapidly spiraled into death threats and physical attacks, leaving Jewish students alarmed and vulnerable. At least 124 anti-Semitic incidents have been reported on campuses since October 7th, and that's likely a severe undercount. The response to this has been empty rhetoric. Words have been weak, action has been slow. No action has resulted in Jewish students feeling safe or welcome. This example is why I'm an original co-sponsor of a congressional resolution condemning the support of Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations at our institutions of higher education. We will not tolerate the creation of a hostile environment for our Jewish students, faculty, and staff on college campuses. If you won't do it, then we will take action ourselves. Madam Chair, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the gentlewoman from New York.
Dr. Kornbluth, at MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
So those would not be according to the MIT's code of conduct or rules?
That would be investigated as harassment if pervasive and severe.
Ms. Magill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. Magill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
yes
speech
or
becomes
no?
if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. Magill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, targeted at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric. When
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Mr. Scott, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Freedom of speech protects not just popular speech. I've heard many of you refer to that. Can you comment on what speech is protected and what speech is not protected? Starting with Dr. Gay.
Speech is protected, and that protection extends even to speech we find objectionable and offensive and even outrageous. It's when speech crosses into conduct that violates our very clear policies around bullying, harassment, intimidation,
Now,
that it becomes actionable.
now, when it's targeted and creates imminent threats of violence, that can
Yes.
actually be criminal.
Yes.
But the Title VI standard isn't that, it doesn't require all of that. You can just have you can have much less of a standard to create a violation of Title VI. When do you know, what is the Title VI standard for when speech violates Title VI and creates a hostile environment?
I cannot recite that from memory.
Does anybody know from the kinds of things that would constitute a Title VI violation?
Yeah, hostile environment that prevents the students from attaining their educational acquisition.
Students have a right to feel safe on campus. Would the standard of a hostile environment apply to all students or just Jewish students?
All students.
Dr. Magill, a lot has been said about some of the speakers that have been invited. Who invites the speakers?
Congressman, it varies. It might be a student organization, it might be a faculty member, it might be a staff member. It might be my office.
Well, does your office always control who the speakers, what speakers are invited?
Following the guidance of the United States Constitution, based on the views that we think they're going to express, we sometimes condemn those views if they're deeply inconsistent with our values, but we don't censor or prevent speakers from coming based on the views, even if they're offensive.
And Dr. Gay, you said several students are subject to disciplinary actions. Typically, how long does that disciplinary action take to be completed?
So the process, we try to move with all deliberate speed, but it varies depending on the complexity of the incident. It could be a matter of days or weeks, or it could be a bit longer than that. And the range of consequences vary, but up to and including expulsion from Harvard.
Several comments have been made that the campuses are full of anti-Semitism, and that's the only problem on campus. Again, the university president's comment on that.
It is not the only problem on campus. It's particularly acute at this moment. And as I've mentioned before, students have offered searing testimony about what they've been experiencing. But it's not just anti-Semitism, it's also Islamophobia and frankly, just hostility to individuals who are visibly Muslim or Arab or Palestinian. And then we also have other student communities that feel marginalized, not just in this moment, but have been struggling to feel a sense of belonging at Harvard for some years, including students of color.
Ms. McGill?
I would describe very much the same experience at the University of Pennsylvania, as
And
Dr. Gay described.
Dr.
Yes.
Kornbluth?
Racism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ sentiment. One thing, if I might add, about free speech on campus with these issues is that the best way to fight negative speech is more speech. To have speakers and individuals who fight anti-Semitism and can speak to our students on campus.
Thank you. You back. Thank you, Dr. Fox. I want to thank our witnesses for participating in today's hearing. Protecting students from discrimination and harassment is central to fostering a safe and welcoming campuses. Regrettably, following the October 7th attacks, college campuses have experienced a disturbing rise in incidents of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. It's great to have the opportunity to hear directly from campus leaders on what they are doing to be more proactive and prevent incidences of violence and harassment on campus. And I applaud President Biden's leadership and the administration for actively helping institutions protect students as part of the White House's national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. Under the President's direction, the Department of Education has provided additional guidance to colleges and universities on how to uphold their obligation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and better address anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of discrimination on campus. They've already opened about 15 Title VI investigations into recent incidences on campus since October 7th. And finally, as members of Congress, we also have the responsibility to condemn discrimination as we see it, and we should fully fund the Office of Civil Rights so that they will have the resources to investigate these cases. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. Post-secondary education has never been held in such low esteem in our country as it is today. Indeed, I do not refer to colleges and universities any longer as higher education because it's my opinion that higher order skills are not being taught and learned. And I think today's hearing indicates that. I think Mr. Williams was on to something in his line of questioning about why are we here at this stage when you all talk about education being the answer to the problems. Now I want to remind everyone why we're here. I started the hearing by recognizing the students we have in the audience today. You're the ones bearing the brunt of the hate that is festering on our campuses. You're the reason we're calling attention to these issues and will continue holding college leaders accountable for failing to protect you. You're heroes, and I thank you for your courage. One of the students here today is Talia Khan. She's an undergraduate alumna of MIT and currently a graduate student there. And she wrote a letter to the committee. I request unanimous consent to submit her full letter for the record without objection. I encourage all the members to read it. Unfortunately, I don't have time to read the whole thing, but I want to give you a sample. Quote, I'm a Jewish student, the daughter of a Jewish mother and an Afghan Muslim father. I'd like to bring to your attention my perspective as a Jewish student currently immersed in an extremely toxic atmosphere at MIT, unquote. She goes on to describe a litany of violence, harassment, and bullying against Jewish students on MIT's campus and inaction by the MIT administration. She then concludes with a plea for help from the MIT administration. Quote, unfortunately, I have been put in charge of working to keep MIT students feeling safe. I have been put in charge of advocating for hundreds of frightened students, afraid of retribution. I want to stop being told about the most recent anti-Semitic incident and feeling like I have to push and push to report it, even though nothing ever gets done. This should not be my job. Sally Kornbluth, please let me be a student again. It is your job to keep Jewish students safe, not mine, unquote. Talia, thank you for sharing your ordeal with this committee. Talia happens to be a student at MIT. Unfortunately, her story isn't unique to that campus. Horrific acts of hate, violence, and intimidation are happening at the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, and institutions all over the country. And institutional leaders are failing to meet the movement with courage, clarity, or decisive action. I also ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a Wall Street Journal op-ed from this past Sunday by Lance Morrow. The op-ed is called, quote, the new anti-Semitism is the oldest kind, end quote, without objection. This op-ed is clear-eyed about the threat we face. Talking about the anti-Semitism of the post-war era, Morrow said, quote, America's anti-Semites in those days were more fools than monsters, unquote. Then he says, quote, the anti-Semitism that is poured forth onto the country's streets and campuses in the autumn of 2023 is a different thing. A reversion to a politics of aggressive, unapologetic hate. Of course, the new Jew haters, especially young people on campuses, think of themselves as perfectly virtuous. What is 1,000 times worse, they think of their Jew hatred as righteous. It's morally fashionable among them, unquote. And this brings me back to the beginning. Presidents Gay, Magill, and Kornbluth, you have real and important practical challenges. These are real students sitting here, and they need to be protected. But you also have a moral challenge. It is fashionable among too many members of your campus communities to hate Jews. It is ideological acceptable. As you do the practical work of protecting your campus, you must also do the rhetorical work of changing hearts and minds. That's your job as a campus president. That means being willing to risk your job to speak truth clearly, consistently, and unapologetically, even when the Jew haters turn their hate to you. We'll now be watching, and I genuinely hope, for the sake of our nation, you will rise to meet the challenge. Without objection, there being no further business, the committee stands adjourned.